Okay, hi everybody. Hi Emanuele and Simone. Hello Thomas. Happy to have you here. And today I'm so excited for today's conversation, right? And I think with the unbossing dimensions, we often say the third is that you need to change your organizational structure from an oil tanker to a fleet of speed. And having Emanuele and Simone here makes it so exciting. Finally, we get to answer the question of okay, how does it actually work? But before we start, Emanuele and Simone, could you please tell us a bit about yourselves and how you actually got to this point with Boundaryless?
Yeah, maybe I can start quickly. I am Simone, the CEO of Boundaryless. I started my journey as a consultant more or less 20 years ago. And yeah, basically in 2013, I started to work with platforms. I created the platform design toolkit that at the time it was the first framework for designing multi-sided businesses. It was, let's say, the moment where platforms were debuting on stage, and it was the moment everybody was excited with Airbnb and Uber. And I must say, after 10 years after, often people use the same examples, but the platform economy has been unfolding much more widely. So, I've been working with platforms for 10 years, and in the last five, more or less, we founded Boundaryless. Emanuele, that will speak in a minute, joined us to work more on the organizational elements. So, Emanuele, up to you to complete the discussion and introduction.
Thank you, Simone. Yes, I'm representing a bit of the other side because we believe there are always two sides in every organization: the organization design, but on the other side, the interface, the interaction with the market. I spent the last 20 years working mostly in global, huge organizations with thousands of people in the usual suspects, the big consulting companies. Working with global teams, different cultures across countries, always trying to make organizations not only more efficient and effective and profitable, but also more humane. In the last 10 years specifically, I looked into extreme organizational models, so things that most organizations don't dare to investigate and even less to experiment with. And then when I left the last company I had responsibility for future of work in, I decided to join some braver, let's say smaller, nimbler context in which we could make a dent in the universe. So in Boundaries, I'm representing what we call the trio, the entrepreneurial ecosystem enabling organization. So how you can play a platform, an ecosystemic role in the market internally. And I help large organizations, those same large organizations, to play with it and potentially to make employees' life and customers' life better thanks to these new extreme organizational models.
That's excellent. At this point, I'm sure Thomas has so many questions to ask.
Go ahead, Deborah. I will chime in. Don't worry.
Okay, so let's move on. I'm just wondering, so currently, right, with what you do, I'm sure you've experienced so many different kinds of organizations, and in your own views, how would you describe the kinds of organizations we have, starting from the ones that are the traditional rigid bureaucracies, right up to companies like Spotify, where there's they are, as you'd call it, unbundled and with a high degree of freedom and autonomy for the different teams.
Maybe I will take up that first.
Yeah.
So the first point is that let's be clear. I've been doing this for more than 20 years, and most of the market is still very far from everything we are going to say. That's a reality, right? As consultants, we would like them to be quicker, braver, but it takes time. It takes organizational times. On the other side, there is a much bigger number of organizations, even if that's a fraction of the total, a much bigger number of organizations that are embracing entrepreneurial organizational models, that are unbundling themselves into many entrepreneurial teams, that are going beyond hierarchy, are going beyond hierarchy as the mechanism for control and coordination, because we discovered in the last 40 years that there are better ways to achieve freedom on one side, autonomy, but also adaptiveness and consistency. So we believe this is possible, and actually it's happening. So what we have been doing in the last few years is connecting the dots. So looking for patterns in an organization that has been doing this starting in 1959, Kyocera, 1959. This is really old. They called it amoeba management, so it's not new. With even more progressive organizations such as Ayer that started.
Sorry, Emanuele.
Yes.
Can you repeat the name of the company, please?
Yeah, it's Kyocera. So the one producing printers, right?
Yeah. Ah, yeah.
Kyocera with
Japanese, correct?
Yeah, Japanese. 1959. So some of this is not really new. The courage with which you embrace it and you combine, maybe we'll talk about that, the unbundling, so from fragmenting a monolith, a robust organization, into many small entrepreneurial speedboats, right? And how you can help them to move together without hierarchy. Well, having both of them is new. But still, we are seeing patterns that are common in many organizations. And Spotify, yes, is one of them, but there is Valve that is doing this, there is WL Gore, there is Morningstar, there is Burzorg. There are many examples in any industry. So the excuse of this won't ever work for me, or whatever work in my industry, is no longer valid. It's still a small percentage, but a growing one, with examples everywhere, in every part of the world and in every industry.
Sorry, Emanuele, now I have to chime in. You say there are coming excuses, right? What you mean with that is the real reasons are not mentioned. That's the definition of an excuse, right? So what you are saying is the management who is using such excuses, who tells you, oh, sorry, it doesn't work with me, they simply do not want it. And I'm curious of what you think, Emanuele. What are the real reasons why they do not want it?
The real reason is that we built organizations exactly to protect the opposite effect. So if you look at scientific management, if you look at Taylorism, if you look at how, again, 95% of organizations are designed, well, they are designed for a future that can be predicted. Removing variance, removing, if you want, the messiness that human beings have. The fact that individuals make hard decisions in their life, think about your mortgage, and that they would like to do the same in organizations. The fact that customers would like to impact more into the business, into the experience they have. The fact that in the last couple of years we have seen a pandemic, we have seen the war everywhere, and nobody could predict it. So at the end, the world we are living in is totally different in comparison to the design of our organization that is meant to protect the same dynamics forever. On one side, we have what we call complexity, what we have complex adaptive spaces. Our world is complex, meaning it cannot be predicted. It's not deterministic, really. On the other side, you have a machine that has been designed to repeat the same task again and again and again, exactly in the same way. So why bothering about changing something which you feel comfortable? in which you
Yeah.
became the CEO, in which you
Yeah.
got 20 millions bonus, in which you can control all the people and tell them what to do, pretending that this is really effective. So as long as they can do it, because organizational times, as we said, are very long, so some shifts don't happen in 2 months or in 2 years. Well, if you can do that, why bothering? That's to me the big psychological excuse. Sometimes it's also a financial excuse. You are doing well, you are a leader. Why changing, right? The point is that if you're a leader, if you have 80,000 people or 200,000 people, it will take you years to change. So unless you
Yes.
start steering now, it will be too late when you'll be able to change. So on one side, there are many reasons, psychological and financial reasons for not doing it. On the other side, if you are not doing it already, well, you are too late.
Deborah, can I chime in with one last one on that point? Emanuele.
Yes,
So
you
I am,
can.
thank you. So Emanuele, it's clear that you are the magician um, in terms of organizational development, but you are also a missionary. Uh, that is how I see it, how I feel you. Simone, what is your role?
Well, I mean, I was listening because it's coming from the product perspective. I mean, I cannot say that I'm not an org geek, because I am. I've been working with very emergent modes of organizing. You know, I don't have, for example, the experience with large consulting firms that Emanuele has. I was working with a consulting firm for several years, but yeah, essentially in the last 10 years, I've been, even before working with Boundaryless, I was working in digital social innovation, and I tried many, kind of agile and informal organizational models, and so I'm somehow an org geek as well, but my perspective has always been that of products. And what I've seen in the last decade, it's a very strong shift and impact of digital on products. And I tend to look at markets now as enabled by digital, as essentially markets made of platforms and products themselves that are network shaped and very ecosystemic. So, for example, I had in my podcast a few months ago, we had Scott Brinker, the chief ecosystem platform at HubSpot, and we had this very interesting conversation around, how you build an ecosystemic product, and all these massive requirements that are coming from the market in terms of product composability, modularity, API, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, so far Emanuele has been focusing a lot on incumbents, right? On unbundling incumbents, which is one of the things we do, and it's very important to do because essentially when you have such a low transaction cost, like we have today, it doesn't make sense to keep things so bundled like we used to. So it's really a no-brainer to look at your organization and see, maybe I can just unbundle these into more P&Ls and try to sell services on the market, at every level of the value chain. Maybe I'm doing, I don't know, manufacturing cans, and I can sell my digital advertising capability, or whatever. And so this makes sense for incumbents, but it makes even more sense if you look at the market now and you see how even digital products are now required to become more composable. So, for example, I was looking into recently, last week, I was looking into a very significant piece of work from Tidemark, which is a VC firm. It's a fund that invests into what they call vertical SaaS, which is a category that is really eating the market at the moment. So basically, digitally centering traditional B2B spaces and traditional places where we didn't have much digital so far. And so, for example, I don't know, restaurant management or retail management and things like that. And even in those spaces, what you see is increasingly products that have to be modular, composable. You maybe start with the one piece and then you develop another piece, and then that piece needs to be connected with another piece of software from another provider through a no-code tool or through AI or whatever. So essentially, what I wanted to say here is it's no more an option to be abandoned. The world is, from the perspective of transaction costs, is telling companies, try to open up to the market as much as possible if you're an incumbent company. But even if you're building a new product, think about it as a composable piece of Lego that has to cooperate with other pieces. And in this landscape, try to empower the teams to be really autonomous and entrepreneurial, and in the meantime, try to keep a coherent, I would say, offering. It's really a challenge, and that's where we are helping companies. And I think we also share with you our piece on the trilemma, which is the big problem that companies have to ponder today. They have three things: autonomy, adaptability, and coherence. And a big part of becoming a very, I would say, performative organization today is managing the trade-offs between these three things.
Yeah, please go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah, so really, I feel like Simone has taken me right to my next question, right? Because I was going to ask, okay, so now after us seeing what's going on with all the bureaucratic structures, and you've talked about why companies actually need to move from that, right, and be unbundled. I'd like to understand if you could share a little more about what you mean by unbundled, and then like the trade-offs you were talking about, Simone. How can companies how can they actually balance these three things of autonomy, adaptability, and coherence. Sorry. So how would they be able to balance these three things? Because this is like a real big challenge, and I think for most companies, that's what they think of, and they say that, oh, but if I let everybody do what they want, how are we going in the same direction? How will I be seeing that things are being done the way we want them to be done? Right.
I mean, maybe I can just start and then I'll let Emanuele double click on something. But essentially, the point is, first of all, everybody, one thing we have to recognize is that we are living in an age of small players, small teams, small units having huge potential. So it's not like it was 20 years ago that you have to be big, you have to have a big organization to have a potential on the market. If you look at the markets now, there are teams of 10 people that are running $1 billion business. Okay, because we have this leverage, we have these digital tools. Even factories can be automatized at a level that you really need a few people to have a large, enormous impact on the market. So if this is the premise, the question is, how do you unlock as an organization the potential of the teams that you have in your organization to really be such powerful engines of value creation? And I think everybody wants to be adaptable, and adaptability today, it's really about creating many options. So I think this is something that all companies need to understand. The world is becoming unpredictable, so you need to have more options. You need to create more optionality. So I think often when we deal with the trilemma between adaptability, autonomy, and coherence, at the end of the day, it's really a friction between the autonomy you want to give to the teams and the coherence you want to keep as a brand that you have on the table. So maybe, Emanuele, you can explore a little bit more from here.
So I think a first lesson that it's important to share is the fact that you cannot succeed in the market with some strategies, especially ecosystemic strategies, unless you change your organization. So there are many laws for that, Ashby laws, Conway's law, that are often ignored because the owners of these two parts of the organization are different. So there is somebody thinking about strategy and product, somebody thinking about the organization, the people within the organization. So the first lesson is, no, they are the same thing. The second point is that we gave for granted how to maintain a bit of coherence that still most organizations want. You had to accept hierarchy. So you had to accept a predictable top-down way of managing people that created enormous side effects in terms of engagement, in terms of ability to react or to anticipate the market, entrepreneurial approach, and so on. So we paid a big price, but we believed for 100 years that price was needed. That's wrong. So we discovered that that's not really the case. There are cases, just Ayers one, in which you have thousands, tens of thousands of people acting entrepreneurially, and that's the small teams, that's the unbundling of the firm. So looking for a specific product, taking responsibility for profit and loss, deciding the people that they want to have within their team, paying them, deciding how to share revenues and profits with them. So they are like small companies, thousands of small companies, a swarm of companies, but still you can guarantee coherence. That's the magic. That's really the magic, because fragmenting the firm, again, it's not new. It's at the end reasonably easy, but rebundling the organization around the customer outcomes dynamically without overheads, and with that I mean management, control, hierarchical levels, and so on. That's the magic. How you can do that? Basically, you can do that using something that doesn't look like rules or control or punishment, but looks much more like enabling constraints. So what we do, our job, is really about defining this minimum viable structure that the organization has, what we will call the architecting leadership, in terms of the basic principles, not the rules, the basic principles that will inspire the teams to do their own thing, to be entrepreneurial, but at the same time to remain within these boundaries. They're not strict boundaries, that's why we call ourselves boundaryless, but it's really a little bit of coherence. It could be branding, it could be reputation, it could be acting on some specific arenas, and so on. But all of this is not imposed from the top. It's just a way to nudge the system, for example, through investments, more than through control, as to energize people to prioritize that part and leaving the space to do something else. So this Northern will call this a messy coherence. It's not the kind of coherence most managers would like to see. It's messy, It's loosely coupled. It's unpredictable. There are overlaps, but still, this is the bridge between a chaotic world and a totally predictable, simple world. We are exactly in that sweet spot in the middle.
Thanks, Emanuele. See, do I understand that correctly? That you are proceeding as follows. First, you build the speedboats. So you have a whole fleet, 100, 1,000 speedboats with their teams. There they are. And then you say, what's the minimal coordination which we can agree upon and which we need? Is that fair to say?
It's a bit more complex than that, since we talk about complexity. The thing is that consultants have been talking about target operating models forever. So basically, you do a nice design on paper, and then you imagine the world will fit into that design. Wrong, because you cannot predict the future, so you don't know what the design will be. Actually, there won't be any design. It will be a movie, so something in flux. And anyway, you won't know exactly what is needed. So what we do is designing at the same time the boats and let's say the mechanism, the overarching mechanisms to help them to orientate, to move together, to maintain this messy coherence. So the structure, the organizational structure itself, is emergent. the design is emergent and it is co-created, meaning that it's the teams, it's the speedboats that through their action will inform the enabling constraints of the organization. And the enabling constraints of the organization, of course, we will influence the ripples that you see into the sea, right? So you will influence what speedboats can do or cannot do at some point in time. So there is not one over the other. It's both of them at the same time in a constant cycle of influence and evolution, not transformation, because we don't know what's the starting point and we don't know what's the ending point. It's an ongoing journey of resonance with the market and with employees.
I'm fascinated. There is one fault. There is, of course, one fault, and now I say it. Look, Emanuele, I put you together next week in the middle of Rome, in a nice hotel with 20 Italian CEOs. The CEO of the Italian railway, let's take Fiat, maybe Brembo, why not? And you give exactly this missionary, passionate speech. You have also Simone with you, who says, hey guys, let's be clear, there is no other way, okay? There is no alternative. So you do that together. And now I have one simple question. How will the faces of these 20 CEOs look like?
To me, that's easy, and that's a conversation we actually have with CEOs. So without difficult words, if I would ask you or I would ask them, do you want to innovate? What would you say? Would you want to improve your ability to innovate, right? Would you like to increase the level of engagement of your people? Yes or no? Right? Would you like to increase your chances of empowering your customers to not just consume the value, but to contribute to the value? Would you like to remove the organizational debt, the organizational bureaucracy, basically the money you are wasting, so it's costs, delays, disappointment in your organization? Humanocracy, Michele Zanini and Gary Hamel told us this is $8.4 trillion globally.
Yes.
So are you interested into that? Well, you should listen. That's very basic. That's very easy. Then we can talk about the how, the nuances, the solutions, the process. But what we believe is that most of the market has these needs. So these are universal needs. Now we have some ideas, some potentially solutions to address these needs in a scalable way without the weight of the hierarchy. That's it. That's the pitch, if you want.
Thank you. Please go ahead, everyone.
Okay, so I'm actually listening to it, and I like the part where you say it's messy and there's no real defined. I'm just thinking. So in terms of balancing these three things, right? Doesn't mean that there's no perfect fit. So at some point you'd have to sacrifice adaptability. At some point you'd have to sacrifice how does it work, or is there ever a situation where all three can be at the same level, or companies will have to sort of based on whatever they're doing decide which fit would be best for them?
Well, I mean, I think that there is a way to, I would say, in your context, because that's also something that we have to clarify, that every company has a different context. So it's not that in every industry, for example, you have the same situation, because every industry is characterized by a different stage of evolution in the value chain. Some are more commoditized, some are more novel, and so on. So I think the question is also, and that was also something that I wanted to add on top of Emanuele's point with regards to talking to these CEOs. Some of them may be more lucky because they maybe manage a business like railways that has a strong capability to, let's say, to remain I would say, not disrupted, not because of the several constraints that you have. Maybe some are policy constraints, some are industry constraints, capital constraints, and so on. But in general, I would say that every CEO today shouldn't think himself or herself as a boss of one company doing one business. It's much more about opening up your organization into much new industries, new spaces, new arenas, and that part of the business really needs to have more autonomy and more adaptability, and sometimes more coherence. So I think that it really, you really need to understand what level of the value chain and what industry you're working on. But given the context that impacts, let's say, your choices, for example, I don't know, if you are in healthcare, maybe you cannot be completely incoherent because people won't trust you, okay? Or maybe, but if you are in digital games, maybe, or in general in digital services, you can be much more incoherent because small teams can have large impacts. So I think, first of all, you need to assess the industry. You need to understand what's your priority. And once you do so, there are ways for you to maximize, let's say, how much you can be adaptable, autonomous, and coherent based on the trade-offs that are related to your industry. And for example, one thing that we didn't mention so far is that there is not just telling people you can create a micro enterprise, you can do your own business, you can do your own choices, hire your own people, distribute your own revenues, and negotiate your equity. But it's also that sometimes, for example, especially when you are in a digital business, you may have to play with coherent portfolio views and try to use, for example, taxonomies that make it easy for your products to connect and to be reconfigured. For example, you can think of macro product areas, and you can think of components, and you can say, this component can plug into this other component, a little bit like Lego bricks. Okay, so you can have enabling constraints at the organizational level. So the typical ones that we have is, the micro enterprise, the separate P&L, the investment contracts, the multi-unit agreements, and so on. But you can also have enabling constraints at the product design level. So you can have a design leadership in your organization that is able to understand, we have to design for this workflow, we have to design this type of components, and we can imagine our products plugging in and out in this way. And in this way, basically, you tell teams, you can be autonomous, you can create your own product, but if you comply with this taxonomy, it's going to be much easier for you to upsell, to bundle, and to get into the market. And this is always a bit of a trade-off that we see, because at some point, to be more coherent towards customers, you are going to lose some entrepreneurial space. That's normal, But the point is, I think another point that it's good to touch quickly. The point is, we're going in a direction where the single organization counts less. So we are moving into a space where teams from one organization can team up with teams from another organization, maybe, especially if they share some common ground. And what we are seeing also emerging, for example, I spoke about a taxonomy. A product taxonomy is normally something that you use inside an organization. But if we think about what's happening in Web3, for example, with protocols, we are increasingly seeing third taxonomies. So taxonomies that are, I would say, more general, more cross-organization. For example, if you think about Ethereum, or even, I don't know, I can mention, for example, Lens protocol or Farcaster protocol in social media. So we are seeing standards emerging that are facilitating different companies to cooperate and interoperate across the border of the organization. So again, as a recap, the context, the industrial context counts, the culture counts. You can do enabling constraints also at the product design level, and expect a future where it's no more just about your organization, but it's more about teams inside your organization interoperating with others that are across the board, and maybe across sectors as well, maybe with public policy makers. For example, one of our customers in India now It's dealing with a market where policymakers are doing lots of standardization work. They're actually creating commerce infrastructures, for example, that enable much less lock-in for the players. So for example, if you are a sales commerce player and you can sell your stuff on different portals because there is a public standard that enables you to not being locked in into just Amazon or, I don't know, Flipkart, but rather put your products according to a standard that can be sold across different company marketplaces. So that's the evolution. We're moving into a world where there are less constraints, less borders. It's much more fluid, much more optional. The big CEOs in Rome, they should be thinking about that and not just about what they do today.
They should be, Simone. I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more with you.
Marketplaces. So that's the evolution. We're moving into a world where there are less constraints, less borders. It's much more fluid, much more optional. The big CEOs in Rome, they should be thinking about that and not just about what they do today.
They should be, Simone. I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more with you. Deborah, am I allowed to put my final question on the table? See, I think we lost Deborah for the moment. So my final question is, Emanuele and Simone, imagine I am a CEO, and to make it easier, I'm even the owner of, say, a 2,000 people sugar producer in Italy, a very, very traditional business. And we are traditionally organized, as you know it, and we have a Tayloristic way so far of organizing ourselves. Now I hear your speech. I'm inspired, and I really want to do it because I see the advantages and I also see the need to go that way. I'm even inspired by, seeing how hire works. Now the question comes, what is the biggest single mistake in your point of view, which I could do despite all my genuine good intentions?
Oh, that's a good question. Thank you so much. We should start. I have a long list, but I will try.
Well, I have one, so maybe if you want, I can drop one, and then you can take your list. My one is to think yourself as a company doing in a certain business. Like for example, I am a retail company, or I am a telco operator, or something like that. I think this is the biggest mistake you can take. To think your company as a constraint into a certain industry, because that's no more how you should think about your organization.
Yeah, I think there are a bit, some more at least. One of them is thinking that you will be the main force doing it. So this is not a transformation that you can do, even if you're the CEO. I've seen many projects in which the CEO or the owner or the owners honestly wanted to do it, and the project failed because they couldn't transfer the same passion, energy, hope to the rest of the organization, couldn't visualize the impact for them. So this is not a transformation you can do in the board. You need the board, since most organizations are hierarchical, so you need to acknowledge hierarchy, to hijack hierarchy, but that's not enough. So the process of co-creation, of involvement, of enablement of the rest of the organization in the design, not only in using the design, but in creating the design, is a clear aspect. If you don't do that, you will fail. As a consequence of that, most CEOs that I've seen pretend to know already where to apply these principles in their organizations. And since you cannot apply them everywhere because it's too slow, it's too expensive, it's too risky, right? You want to have something smaller to chew. The question will come, okay, where do we start? And often the answer is, I know. Let's start here and there and there. And often they get it wrong again. Because it's not where most of the value and most of the energy and most of the replicability and most of the learning and most of the transformation should happen. Those few bets that you have should be taken by again involving the organization. So we use an approach for that. So we use an approach through which we can have small teams, actually the smallest teams, representative of the entire organization to that. And we asked the people themselves where they want to start, where they want to translate all these stories or these principles in their own business. So it's a way to increase the engagement, but it's also a way to use your limited resources, even if you are the CEO, in a wise fashion. So these are to me the two biggest. Maybe the third one is it takes a bit of patience. So if you don't have patience, if you expect to see results in 3 weeks, good luck. Probably we cannot help.
Thank you so much. So if I may summarize, Simone, what you are saying is don't limit yourself in beliefs. Yes, we have been a company producing widgets or sugar or cars for that matter. And that's what we are saying. But you are saying, Simone, we are a group of talented individuals with certain assets, right? That's what we are. And let's now see how we can go into the future with these talents we have and with these assets we have. And your point, Emanuele, is so interesting. Why? Because I have lots of discussions with colleagues who say, don't forget the executive board in that whole thing. Yeah. So this discussion also on LinkedIn is going on. I'm in the middle of it, where I say agile coaches, scrum masters, stop ignoring the executive board. Yeah, because it's there. And you on the other side, you really open my eyes and say, yes, that's true. But even if you are the CEO, even if you are the owner, even if you are the whole executive board, don't think for one moment that you on your own can steer and keep and carry this transformation if it's not living in your people. Is that fair to say?
It is. You need both. Definitely.
So then I say thank you so much for your time, for these fascinating insights, which I'm sure for some of our listeners will still, I'm looking a bit at you, Simone, sound like science fiction, but a fascinating science fiction.
I mean, if it looks like science fictions to them, I think they're not paying attention to what's happening in the world. You know, that's their problem, and more specifically, they should reach out because we can help them to catch up.
Yeah, thanks for that one. And I leave the last word. I leave the last word to you, Deborah.
I am really grateful that we had this conversation because I feel like it feels like is not to have everything looking so perfect, but the point is to be ready to allow for the organization to flow and allow people to exhibit their talents and their skills and be more fulfilled and feel in control of the work that they're doing. So thank you so much for helping us to sort of demystify a bit what is required to have a fleet of speedboats as opposed to an oil tanker, right? And I think it's a good starting point. Definitely, people need to come back to you for details on how to go about it and to be to start to accept the fact that we can't always seek so much control, especially in the world that we are living in, where everything seems to be moving so quickly. So thank you so much, Simone and Emanuele, for your time. This has been a really interesting and educative session. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Really a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.